The cabin was supposed to be empty. That was the first thing Daniel noticed when he arrived. There were no cars outside, no footprints around the porch, no lights glowing through the windows, and according to the property owner, nobody had stayed there for almost 3 months. But at exactly 2:17 in the morning, Daniel heard someone walking across the floor above him. Slowly. One step, then another. He froze beneath his blanket and listened. The footsteps stopped directly above his bedroom. Daniel stared at the ceiling. Then came 3 quiet knocks. Not on the door, not on the window, from inside the ceiling. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, even though he knew it wouldn't help. Then something happened that made his stomach drop. His phone suddenly received a notification. A motion sensor had detected movement outside the front door. Daniel opened the security camera app. The porch appeared on his screen. Empty. Nothing was there. Then the camera notification appeared again. Motion detected. This time the timestamp said the movement was coming from inside the cabin. Daniel slowly lowered the phone, and from the hallway, outside his bedroom, came the sound of someone whispering his name. Daniel. He hadn't told the property owner his name, and he was completely alone. At least, that's what he thought. Part 1. The Cabin in the Woods. Daniel had been looking for a place where he could disappear for a few days. Not permanently, just long enough to get away from work, traffic, phone calls, and the constant noise of everyday life. He wanted somewhere remote, somewhere quiet. After searching online for nearly a week, he found a small wooden cabin listed for rent deep in the mountains. The photographs looked almost perfect. A narrow dirt road led through thick pine trees before reaching a small clearing. In the center of that clearing stood an old cabin with dark wooden walls, a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was no neighboring house in sight, no restaurant, no gas station, nothing, just forest. The listing described it as a peaceful getaway for people who wanted privacy. Daniel booked it for 3 nights. The owner sent him a short message with the directions. There was one strange instruction: don't arrive after dark. Daniel assumed it was because the road was difficult to navigate at night. He didn't think much about it. On Friday afternoon, he left the city. The drive took almost 4 hours. For the first 2 hours, everything felt normal. Then the cell signal disappeared. Daniel's GPS continued working, but the roads became narrower and rougher. Eventually, the paved road turned into gravel. Then gravel turned into dirt, then gravel turned into dirt. And finally, the dirt road became little more than 2 tire tracks disappearing between the trees. Daniel slowed down. He checked the address again. According to his GPS, he was still going the right way. After another 15 minutes, he finally saw the cabin. It looked exactly like the photographs, but in person it felt different. Much older, much darker. Daniel parked near the porch and stepped outside. The forest was completely silent. No birds, no insects, not even wind moving through the trees. He stood there for a moment, listening. Then he heard something, a faint metallic sound, like someone dragging a chain across the ground. Daniel turned toward the trees. Nothing. He waited. The sound stopped. Probably an animal, he muttered. He grabbed his bags and walked toward the cabin. The front door was unlocked. That surprised him. The owner had told him the key would be inside a small lockbox. Daniel checked the message again. He hadn't misunderstood. There was supposed to be a key, but the door was already open. He pushed it slowly. The cabin smelled like old wood and dust. Inside was a small living room, a kitchen, a fireplace, and a narrow hallway leading toward 2 bedrooms. Everything looked clean, almost too clean. Daniel placed his bags on the floor. Then he noticed something sitting on the kitchen table, a glass. It was half full of water. Daniel stared at it. He touched the glass. The water was cold, very cold. He checked the sink. Dry. He checked the refrigerator. Nothing had been opened. He told himself the owner must have left it there. Then he noticed something else. There was a second glass beside it, also half full. Daniel's smile disappeared, because the property listing had clearly said the cabin had been cleaned before his arrival. And according to the owner, nobody had stayed there for months. Part 2. Something was left behind. Daniel spent the next hour trying to convince himself that nothing was wrong. He unpacked his clothes, made coffee, checked the fireplace, even walked around the cabin to make sure everything was working. Eventually, the strange feeling began to fade. That evening, he cooked dinner and sat near the window. Outside, darkness had swallowed the forest. The trees were barely visible. Daniel looked at his phone. No signal. He smiled to himself. That was probably a good thing. He had come here to disconnect, At around 9:30, he decided to take a shower. The bathroom was located at the end of the hallway. As he walked toward it, he noticed something scratched into the wooden wall. At first, he thought it was just damage. Then he moved closer. There were words. 4 words. "Don't sleep upstairs." Daniel stared at them. The cabin only had 1 floor. He actually laughed. It was the kind of nervous laugh people make when something scares them, but they don't want to admit it. "Very funny," he said. He assumed the owner had left some strange decoration or joke for guests, but then he noticed a narrow staircase at the far end of the hallway. Daniel hadn't seen it before. It was hidden behind a wooden door. He opened the door. A steep staircase disappeared into darkness. Daniel stood there for several seconds. The listing had shown the cabin's interior. There had been no mention of an upstairs room. He switched on the light. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. Daniel looked upward. The staircase seemed to continue farther than the cabin should have allowed. He suddenly remembered the warning carved into the wall. "Don't sleep upstairs." He closed the door. He decided he wasn't going to investigate. Not tonight. He returned to the living room and turned on the television. For the next 2 hours, he tried to ignore the cabin. Then at exactly 11:46 p.m., the television switched off. Daniel frowned. He picked up the remote. The batteries were fine. He turned it back on. A few seconds later, it switched off again. Then he heard something from the hallway. A soft creak. Daniel stopped moving. Another creak. Then another. Someone was walking. Slowly. The sound was coming from the direction of the staircase. Daniel stared down the dark hallway. Nothing moved. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam reached the wooden door. It was open. Daniel was certain he had closed it. He stood up. "Hello?" No answer. He walked closer. The staircase was completely dark. Then something moved at the very top. Daniel's flashlight caught it for less than a second. A shape. A person. Standing completely still. Daniel's entire body went cold. He stepped backward. The light flickered. The shape disappeared. Daniel immediately ran to the front door. He grabbed the handle. Locked. He tried again. Nothing. His hands began shaking. He searched for the key. It wasn't on the table. It wasn't in his pocket. It wasn't anywhere. Then he heard footsteps above him. 1, 2, 3. They were coming down the stairs. Daniel backed away from the hallway. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice came from the darkness. Quiet. Almost gentle. "Daniel." He couldn't breathe, because the voice sounded exactly like his own. Part 3. The voice from upstairs. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. Every part of his body was telling him to run, but his legs felt locked in place. The hallway was completely dark. The voice had come from somewhere near the staircase, and it had sounded exactly like him. Not similar, not close. Exactly like him. Same tone, same hesitation, same low, tired voice. Daniel slowly raised his phone and pointed the flashlight toward the stairs. Nothing. The staircase was empty. He waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing moved. Then his phone vibrated. Daniel nearly dropped it. He looked at the screen. No message, no call. Just a notification from the cabin's security camera. "Motion detected upstairs." Daniel stared at the words. He hadn't known there was a security camera inside the cabin. He opened the notification. The camera feed appeared. The image was black and white. At first he couldn't see anything. Then he noticed the staircase. The camera was positioned at the top, looking downward. Daniel's own face appeared at the bottom of the screen. He was standing exactly where he was now, but there was something else in the image. A dark figure stood behind him. Daniel stopped breathing. He slowly turned around. Nothing. He looked back at the phone. The figure was still there, standing behind him, close enough that it looked like its face should have been touching the back of his head. Daniel spun around again. Nothing. He moved toward the front door. The figure on the camera moved too. Daniel stopped. The figure stopped. He took 1 step. The figure took 1 step. Daniel suddenly understood. The camera wasn't showing him live. It was showing something that had happened moments earlier. Or maybe something that hadn't happened yet. He closed the app. Then the phone rang. The caller ID showed his own number. Daniel stared at it. His first thought was that it had to be some kind of glitch, but the phone kept ringing. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, he answered. For several seconds, there was only static. Then he heard breathing, slow breathing. Very close to the microphone, Daniel whispered, "Who is this?" Nothing. Then the voice spoke. His voice. "Don't open the bedroom door." Daniel looked toward the hallway. His bedroom door was closed. He swallowed. "What?" The voice repeated it. "Don't open the bedroom door." Daniel looked at the bedroom. Nothing had happened there. Not yet. Then something knocked from inside. 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel's phone went silent. The call had ended. He didn't move. Another 3 knocks came from the bedroom. Daniel backed toward the front door. Then he remembered the locked handle. He tried it again. This time it opened. Daniel practically fell through the doorway. He ran outside. Cold air hit his face. He didn't care about his bags. He didn't care about his phone. He didn't care about anything. He ran toward his car, then stopped. His car was gone. Daniel stared at the empty space where he'd parked. For several seconds, his mind refused to understand what he was seeing. He looked around. There were no tire tracks, no broken branches, nothing. His car had simply disappeared. Daniel turned toward the cabin. Every window was dark, except one, the upstairs window. A light had appeared behind it. Daniel's stomach tightened. There shouldn't have been an upstairs window. He was sure of it. Then someone appeared behind the glass. A person, standing perfectly still. Daniel couldn't see the face, but he could see the silhouette. And then the figure slowly raised one hand. It pointed directly at him. Daniel stepped backward. The figure disappeared. The light went out, and somewhere behind Daniel, deep inside the forest, a car engine started. He turned. His car was sitting between the trees, at least 50 yards away. The headlights were on. The driver's door was open. Daniel stared at it. There was no logical explanation. But then he noticed something even worse. The driver's seat was occupied. Someone was sitting behind the wheel. Daniel couldn't see the face, but he could see the person's hand resting on the steering wheel. And then the person turned toward him. Daniel ran, not toward the car, not toward the cabin, into the woods. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he needed distance. Branches hit his face. Roots caught his shoes. He kept running until the cabin disappeared behind the trees. Then he heard footsteps behind him, fast. Daniel ran harder. The footsteps followed. He turned around. Nothing. He kept moving. Again, footsteps. Closer. Daniel turned. Nothing. Then a voice whispered from directly beside his ear. "Daniel." He screamed and fell. His flashlight rolled across the ground. The beam landed on something carved into a tree. Daniel crawled closer. There were dozens of names scratched into the bark. Some were faded, some were fresh. And at the very bottom was a name he recognized. His own. But underneath it was a date. Tomorrow's date. Daniel stared at it. Then he heard a branch snap behind him. He slowly turned. The flashlight beam moved across the trees and stopped on a man standing between them. Daniel couldn't see his face, but he knew the clothes, the jacket, the jeans, the boots. They were his. The man took one step forward. Daniel stopped breathing because now he could see the face. It was his face. Part 4. The room that shouldn't exist. Daniel ran until his lungs burned. He didn't look back. He didn't care where the trail went. He didn't care if he got lost. He just needed to get away from the man wearing his face. Eventually, the forest opened into a small clearing. Daniel fell against a tree. He was shaking so badly that he could barely stand. His phone was still in his hand. The screen showed one bar of signal. For the first time that night, he felt hope. He immediately called 911. The call connected. "Emergency services. What's your location?" Daniel tried to explain. He gave them the cabin address. He described the road, the forest, the cabin. He told them someone was following him. The dispatcher asked if the person was armed. "I don't know." "Are you injured?" "No." "Can you get somewhere safe?" Daniel looked around. "I'm in the woods." There was a pause. Then the dispatcher said something that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Sir, can you confirm the cabin address?" Daniel repeated it. The dispatcher went silent. "Sir, that address doesn't exist." Daniel frowned. "What?" "We have no property registered at that location." Daniel thought she had misunderstood. He gave the address again. This time the dispatcher interrupted him. "Sir, there is a road there, but there hasn't been a cabin at that location for years." Daniel's mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" The dispatcher asked him to stay on the line. Then the connection became distorted. Daniel heard static, then another voice. Not the dispatcher, his own voice. "Don't tell them where you are." Daniel froze. The dispatcher suddenly came back. "Sir, are you there?" Daniel didn't answer. He looked toward the trees. Something was moving between them. He backed away. The dispatcher kept talking. "Sir, if you can hear me, stay where you are. Officers are being sent to your location." Daniel finally whispered, "How long?" "Approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Daniel looked at his phone. The battery was at 8%. He didn't have 20 minutes. He heard footsteps. Again, slow, coming closer. Daniel turned off the flashlight. He crouched behind a fallen tree. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a voice came from somewhere in the darkness. "Daniel?" He covered his mouth. The voice continued. "You shouldn't have called them." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. The voice was his. Again. Then his phone vibrated. A message appeared. "Unknown number." Daniel opened it. There was only one sentence. "Look behind you." He didn't. Every instinct told him not to. The phone vibrated again. Another message. "You already did." Daniel's heart slammed against his chest. Then the flashlight on his phone switched on by itself. The beam pointed directly at the ground. Daniel looked down. There were footprints in the dirt. Bare feet. They started several feet away. They continued toward him and stopped directly behind his hiding place. Daniel slowly raised his eyes. Nothing. Then he noticed the footprints again. They weren't leading toward him. They were leading away, from where he was sitting, toward the cabin. Daniel looked through the trees. The cabin was visible in the distance. The lights were on, every single one. He hadn't turned them on. Then the front door opened. A person stepped onto the porch. Daniel couldn't see the face, but the figure was wearing his clothes, his jacket, his boots, the same clothes he had been wearing when he arrived. The figure looked directly toward the forest, toward Daniel. Then it lifted one hand and waved. Daniel's phone vibrated one final time. A photograph had arrived. He opened it. It showed the cabin, taken from the forest, taken from exactly where Daniel was hiding. But the photograph wasn't of the cabin now. It showed Daniel standing on the porch, looking directly into the camera, and beneath the photograph was a timestamp. 3 days from now. Daniel stared at the screen. Then he noticed something in the background of the photograph. Someone was standing behind him, a second Daniel. And this one was smiling. The phone screen went black. The battery had died. And from somewhere behind Daniel came a whisper. Not his voice this time. A woman's voice. Very soft. Very close. Finally. Daniel slowly turned, and the last thing he saw before everything went dark was the cabin standing between the trees. Except now, there were two of them. Daniel stood between the two cabins. For the first time that night, he couldn't trust his own memory. One cabin was bright. The other was completely dark. Then he remembered something. The cabin he had entered earlier had a small crack beside the front door. Daniel looked at the two buildings. The bright cabin had the crack. The dark cabin didn't. He started walking toward the bright one. Then he stopped. Something was wrong. He remembered the glass of water on the kitchen table. 2 glasses. 2 people. Daniel slowly turned toward the dark cabin. The front door was still open. Inside, he could see a kitchen table, and on it were 2 glasses of water. Daniel stepped backward. Then the bright cabin door slammed shut. Every light inside went out. The dark cabin remained open. A voice came from inside. His voice. "Daniel, you chose the wrong one." Daniel ran. He didn't know which direction he was going anymore. He only knew he couldn't stay there. He pushed through the trees until he saw headlights. A police vehicle. 2 officers stepped out. One of them shouted, "Daniel!" Daniel nearly collapsed from relief. He ran toward them. "Please," he said, "you have to get me out of here." The officers looked at each other. Then one asked, "Where is the cabin?" Daniel pointed behind him, but there was nothing there. No cabin, no porch, no windows, just trees. Daniel turned back toward the officers. "It's right there." The older officer stared at him, then quietly said, "Daniel, you've been missing for 3 days." Daniel stopped breathing. "No." The officer showed him a photograph. It was Daniel, standing beside his car, 3 days earlier. The officer continued, "We found your vehicle near the road. The cabin burned down years ago." Daniel shook his head. "That isn't possible." Then the officer asked him one question. "Where did you sleep last night?" Daniel opened his mouth. Nothing came out, because suddenly he couldn't remember. The officers took him away from the forest. Daniel never returned to the cabin. But months later he received a package, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Daniel opened it. His hands began to shake. It showed the cabin, the same cabin he'd seen in the woods. And standing on the porch was Daniel, but the photograph had been taken the night he disappeared. Daniel looked closer. There were two figures behind him. One was the version of himself he'd seen in the forest. The other was standing inside the doorway. Daniel zoomed in. His face went completely pale because the second figure wasn't another version of him. It was a woman, and she was holding a handwritten note. 4 words, "You left me here." Daniel stared at the photograph. He had no idea who she was until he turned it over. On the back was a date, and beneath it one final sentence. "Next time, don't forget." Daniel never went back to that forest. But according to the people who investigated the area, hikers occasionally report seeing a cabin between the trees that isn't there on any map. And sometimes, late at night, they see someone standing in the upstairs window. Man, watching the road, waiting for someone to arrive. And if you ever find a cabin in the woods that looks completely empty, don't assume you're the first person to enter. Because sometimes, the cabin isn't waiting for a guest. It's waiting for someone to remember why they came.